Well, hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the political editors of The Guardian and The Sun, Pippa Crerar and Harry Cole. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. Welcome to both of you. So, to the Eye, first of all, it says Rishi Sunak has yet to make a decision over whether to launch a formal ethics inquiry over the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman's handling of her speeding offence last year. The Guardian carries the findings of an investigation which heard that thousands of hospital staff have reported that they've been sexually abused while at work. The Metro has the renewed search for Madeleine McCann at a Portuguese reservoir near to where she went missing back in 2007. The Sun calls the situation the riddle of the lake. Similarly, here is the Mirror, their headline, Maddie Cops search lake. The Guardian, the Financial Times rather, reports on Facebook's parent company Meta being fined more than £1 billion by the EU's privacy regulator over how it handled users' data. And the Times leading on government plans to cut NHS waiting lists by encouraging patients to use the NHS app to choose treatment in private hospitals. Well, quick reminder, don't forget to scan that QR code that you'll see on screen during the programme, and you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. Before we listen and get more from Pippa and Harry, let us bring you some breaking news we're just getting. Sky News understands that Dominic Raab will stand down as an MP at the next election. He, of course, MP for Esher and Walton since 2010. He had recently held the post of Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary, forced to stand down over bullying allegations, which he disputed. But previously he had been Brexit Secretary and then Foreign Secretary, under which he oversaw and was criticised for the pullout from Afghanistan. So our understanding is that Mr Raab will not stand as an MP at the next general election. Well, let's head to our guest then and get more on that. Harry, I don't suppose this comes as too much of a surprise for people.
No, I don't think so. Look at the local Lib Dems in his patch. It was a tight seat anyway. He only just scraped back a couple of times in the last many elections we've had of late. Obviously, an incredibly disillusioned figure from Deputy Prime Minister to backbencher to now soon to be ex-MP whenever the election comes. I think it was no surprise to people who've seen Dominic Raab of late, spoken to him in the last month. He does feel very poorly treated, I think, by not necessarily the Prime Minister, but certainly left-wing activists, trade unions like the FDA, who did coordinate a lot of complaints that turned out not to have been upheld. He does feel there was a bit of a witch hunt against him. One complaint was upheld, which was a very senior official who had been caught red-handed trying to undermine Brexit negotiations, and it was slightly more complicated than the sort of image of a workplace bully that was allowed to sort of propagate for months and months. So no surprise when you see him throw in the towel, and I suspect he'll didn't fancy another 5 years on the backbenches.
Pippa, a lot of shaking of head there. Explain your position.
Well, I agree with Harry that the Lib Dems were snapping at Dominic Raab's heels. He had a majority of just over 2,000 in 2019 compared to a majority of 23,000 2 years before that. So he looks set to lose the election. He also, in his letter to his constituency chairman, cites the pressure of his job over many years on his young family. He's got two sons, I think, who are just 8 and 10. That is a consideration many politicians share. But I'm afraid his characterisation of the Dominic Raab bullying row, I think, is slightly, should we say, one-sided. To say it was two complaints were upheld is not the case. One of those complaints was several, in fact, more than several, a number of civil servants, junior ones and senior ones, at the Ministry of Justice. It wasn't the group complaint which wasn't upheld. It was the individual ones. And I think Adam Tolley, because he was the KC that was carrying out the investigation arranged by Rishi Sunak into those allegations over several months, because he came to the conclusion that he wanted to protect the anonymity of the civil servants, because obviously they don't have a public voice, and indeed the witnesses. He left out a lot of detail of the report, but we reported on a lot of these stories, and some of the detail was incredibly harrowing about how he treated civil servants and how he made them feel, including in one case pushing somebody to the brink of suicide, which is a very serious allegation. And another of the complaints which wasn't upheld from his time back in DEXU, when he was briefly Brexit secretary, was only not basically Holly didn't come to judgment either way because he said it was so long ago. So I think to say that he's been hard done by and that it was some civil service blob trying to take him down is very much what Dominic Raab and his supporters would like you to say.
I said, yeah. I said he feels hard. Pippa, I said he feels hard done by. Anyone who's spoken to him said this is how he feels. This is him
I'm sure
saying
that's right.
He feels badly treated. Yeah.
OK, and I think some in that group complaint had actually accepted that they hadn't actually had much interaction with him. So, that fed into his,
That was not that complaint, Anna. That was a separate complaint which wasn't upheld.
Gotcha. Anyway, he is one, as we know, of a number of resignations from the Sunak government. He'll be hoping to hold on to Suella Braverman, one imagines. So The Guardian, if we kick off with that, and might as well stay with you, Pippa, on this if you don't mind. The most senior civil servant in the Home Office was made aware of allegations that Suella Braverman wanted to help in dealing with a speeding fine. So explain the significance of that, then.
Right. So, I mean, it's really interesting because this story obviously broke on Saturday afternoon, and the expectation, I think, when people came back to Westminster today was, and of course Rishi Sunak was flying back from Japan, was that he would consult with his ethics advisor, Laurie Magnus, and that he would probably ask him to investigate these claims. And of course, that hasn't happened today. I think, casting back to Dominic Raab, Rishi Sunak took a couple of days there as well. Number 10 suggests that he wants to follow due process. He wants to be seen to be doing things the right way. So he's obviously taking time to find out himself what the facts were before he asks Laurie Magnus to investigate, if indeed he does do that. So this story in The Guardian is a suggestion that the civil servant who was asked by Suella Braverman to arrange, according to the claims, to arrange a bespoke driving awareness course, was understood that it was potentially a breach of the code, that certainly it shouldn't be something that they should be asked to do, and reported that up to Matthew Rycroft, who's the Permanent Secretary, the most senior official in the department. And what it does, I think, is raise the question about whether other senior officials or indeed other senior politicians knew about these allegations, which of course all happened back in September, even though they only just came out now. So it's question marks about who knew what and when, I guess, while we wait to see what Rishi Sunak decides to do in terms of an ethics investigation into the allegations.
Yes, and that idea of waiting, again, makes the front page of the Eye, Harry, does it not? I know Jacob Rees-Mogg was suggesting that, celebrities can have private speeding hearings or, the lesson rather than taking the 3 points. If she'd asked anybody else, would it have been all right for her to ask, or was it just plain wrong on every level?
No, that's what the number of this comes down to. She's phoned up a lawyer and said, "Can you organise me a private meeting?" Mr. Loophole, one of the sort of lawyers, one of the sort of driving lawyers, has come out and publicly said he's organised loads of VIP one-on-one meetings. There's a question of whether it's a bad look that the Home Secretary didn't want to sort of mingle with the public, so to speak. But then her defenders are saying we've got to take into security concerns. So when she did raise in the office, and no one's denying that she did raise it in the office and say, look, how could I do this? Is there a chance I can do this one-on-one? It looks like the civil service, it went into the civil service machine. I think it reached all as far as the Cabinet Office before it came back and said, actually, no, this isn't really something the civil service can help you with. Now, the question, the nub of this issue is did her asking her private office for advice constitute a breach of the ministerial code? Now, that's what I think the delay in the ethics advisor and the Prime Minister is coming down to, is that a breach that is worthy of an investigation? If it is a breach, was she just, sort of looking at her different options? Ultimately, she didn't do this. So I suspect it feels like the longer this goes on, there felt a sort of change in mood tonight, that actually it feels like perhaps Rishi Sunak, we saw him in the Commons, Suella Braverman kind of supportively on the back when he arrived in the Commons. Is he actually thinking that perhaps this has been a little bit overblown? He wants to see the paper trail. He wants to know if things were done in the right way. And actually, maybe there won't be the investigation that the opposition are clamouring for. And actually, because nothing actually came of it, whether this really is a breach. So I suspect we'll know very early tomorrow morning.
Yes, I've done nothing untoward. Doesn't mean I didn't try to do something untoward. I suppose her critics would argue.
But also, is it untoward though? I think is the question. I think
Okay.
is it untoward to say actually, is there a way as the Home Secretary with my security detail that I can go to a meeting one-on-one? It's whether she's no one's suggesting that she tried to avoid paying the fine or doing the course. If she'd be trying to get out the course and pay the fine, obviously that's untoward. But I haven't seen any evidence yet of anyone actually suggesting that she tried to avoid some form of punishment, which is either the course or the points.
Go for it, Pippa. Honestly, I can see you're itching. Go.
No, it's obviously not. Harry's absolutely right. It's not suggesting that she was trying to avoid it. But the point is, the ministerial code is quite clear about either apparent or actual conflicts, and that ministers need to keep their public duties apart from their private lives. So that means that ministers can't, for example, ask their civil servants to arrange their Tesco shopping to be delivered or their kids to be picked up from school, or indeed to sort out arrange a speeding awareness course. And I think what it comes down to is, did she ask them for advice, or did she direct them, as some of the claims suggest, did she direct them to actually arrange that course? And I suspect that's what will come down to ultimately. But regardless, it does feel like on the lesser end, the lower end, if you like, of potential breaches. And under the new rules, it's not just a case of a sort of a binary case of either a minister's found guilty and they're sacked, or they're not found guilty and they stay in post. There's a range of sanctions available to the Prime Minister, including things like a public apology or docking a bit of their ministerial salary. And it feels likely that if this investigation goes forward, and there's lots of ifs here, I understand that, she's found to have breached the code, that we wouldn't necessarily, even in that case, expect her to go.
Yes, indeed. Well, actually, the Eye, in its few paragraphs on its front page, says that Braverman is picking fights and looking for an excuse to get sacked as new party divisions break into the open. The kind of suggestion was that that's what happened last time she resigned, Harry.
Well, that was a crazy time for everyone, which if anyone wants to know exactly what happened there, they should buy my book. I've got to get a plug in there.
It was the Liz Truss era, people.
It's clearly a controversial figure, but I don't think actually if you think why Rishi Sunak brought her back just 10 days after she was sacked by Liz Truss, her coming over to Rishi Sunak and pulling out the race and saying it's got to be Rishi basically killed Boris Johnson's hopes of a comeback last October stone dead. So, she is a powerful figure on the right. She is a leadership contender. She was almost certainly going to be one of if the Tories lose the election, one of the major candidates to be the leader of the opposition. So, politically, it's a headache for Sunak as well. She may be itching for a fight, but I'm not saying she's unsackable. And if I do say that, she'll probably get fired tomorrow. But, you've got to look at where Sunak is. He is not in a great position at the moment. Yes, he's got the sort of party rump of MPs and ministers behind him, but the right wing of the party are cross. They are agitating. They want more vision. They want tax cuts. They want something done about migration, all building up to Thursday when there's going to be this great crescendo of the government's failure on immigration and all the promises laid bare before everyone's eyes. Rishi Sunak isn't going to want to take that by himself. He's going to want Suella Braverman there as a bit of a human shield to keep the right wing of his party happy. So she's in a much stronger position than people on Twitter would have you believe. Well,
I mean, you say a failure of government policy, but are we actually being able to send our pigs to the abattoir because we brought in abattoir workers and actually staff our care homes because they brought in care home workers? So that's what people will be analysing on Thursday when they see the migration workers and the sort of skilled workers who've come in on that. I'm just going to revert to the Daily Telegraph, Pippa. On the front page, they've got the Raab story there. They say the Daily Telegraph has seen an exchange of letters between the former Deputy Prime Minister and the chairman of his local Conservative association explaining his decision. Mr Raab wrote the letter dated last Friday. I have become increasingly concerned over the last few years about the pressure the job has placed on my young family. His sons Peter and Joshua, as you said, aged 10 and 8 respectively, points you've already made. But the Telegraph has that story on its front page. Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me once again, Pippa Crerar and Harry Cole from The Guardian and The Sun. Welcome back to both of you. So big day in terms of NHS and Labour, Pippa. My NHS reforms will cut the biggest killers within a decade. He's talking about heart disease, cancer, suicide as well. But some big pledges, don't know what money he's talking about, and some very familiar-looking targets, which were very Blairite, I thought, listening to them.
Well, they weren't just Blairite; they're Tory targets. I mean, there's a series of 5 targets about ranging from things like A&E waiting times to ambulance waits to cancer referrals, which have been proposed by the government. And which Labour has said that they would deliver in the first 5 years of a Labour government, prompting some sort of scepticism as to whether they're actually deliverable. But I think that scepticism really just goes far to show what sort of lack of faith people have in government running the NHS at the moment, given it's really been on in many cases, it's on its knees. And I should caveat that with the fact that hospitals, GPs, and other NHS providers offer an incredible service despite the pressures that they face on workforce and other issues. But yes, this is one of Keir Starmer's 5 missions, which he is setting out. We've already had, let me get this right, crime, the economy, and education. And I think we've got climate still to come. Health is obviously a big one. NHS is often at the top of the list of voters' concerns coming up to an election. And this is not a sort of a policy. This is not their policy proposals in their entirety on the NHS. This is supposed to be sort of like the work underpinning what will then be set out at the autumn conference, then ahead of an election in a manifesto next year. But what Keir Starmer was unable to do today in any of the broadcast interviews that he did this morning, and indeed in the questions after this event that you're picturing there, was to set out explicitly how some of these changes would be funded. And I think the closest we got to it was him acknowledging in an interview beforehand that him signalling that that Labour government would put more funding into the NHS in England. They've talked a lot about wanting to reform it, but they have acknowledged, and he said, that yes, he put he was asked about where he put his money where his mouth is on this, and he said yes, money is part of the answer, and the NHS is always better funded under Labour. So that was a step forward from where we've been before, in that he's at least saying, he's acknowledging that it will require some cash. What he's not yet doing is setting out in its entirety where that money would come from. There's a few specific examples, like more doctors and nurses paid for by scrapping the non-dom tax and so on. But I think there will be an expectation from the electorate that he does set out more detail. They say they're going to do that. Let's see. But it's so key to voter trust in whether future governments are likely to be able to deliver on some of the policies like we saw today.
Yeah, OK, very interesting. Quick 30 seconds, Financial Times, talking about Meta. We finally found out what GDPR does, apart from make us go accept all cookies endlessly. Harry?
Yeah, a pretty hefty, whacking great fine there, which I think, I'm one of the people that gives the EU its fair amount of stick over the years. But, this is clearly something globally that lots of people are incredibly concerned about. Our online safety bill in the UK is, somewhere bouncing around, I think, in the House of Commons, House of Lords at the moment. Clampdowns on sort of the tech giants are coming, and this is where the EU can use its heft. That Meta, probably one of the most famous and biggest companies in the world, has hit a wall here. I suspect there'll be loads of legal wranglings around it, but it's certainly a good sign of a show of intention that these companies cannot be bigger than countries and bigger than governments, and need to be brought to heel from time to time. So yeah, good on them.
OK, Harry, Pippa, thank you both very much indeed.